Darkness. Nothing but the endless, rolling waves of the Atlantic Ocean. The kind of darkness that swallows everything whole. No city lights. No landmarks. Just a man, his boat, and the deep, unforgiving sea. For seasoned sailors, the ocean is predictable, its patterns familiar. But on one fateful night, under the cover of a starless sky, a Florida sailor witnessed something so disturbing, so unexplainable, that he swore he would never speak of it again. Until now. The story you're about to hear isn't just another sailor's ghost tale. This isn't folklore. This is real. A routine voyage, an experienced man, and an ordinary night. That's how it started. But then, something changed. A flicker of movement in the water. A whisper through the radio. Static, then silence. And then, a sight so chilling, it still keeps him awake at night. A lone object, floating in the distance. At first, it looked like debris, maybe wreckage. But as he got closer, the hairs on his arms stood on end. It wasn't just floating. It was watching. Authorities were called. Reports were made. But the official response? Nothing to see here. No answers. No explanations. And just days later, the man who made the call was warned to keep quiet. Who was watching him that night? What was lurking just beneath the surface? And why, after all these years, is someone still trying to bury the truth? Before we get into this shocking mystery, I need you to do something. If you've ever heard of an unexplained event at sea, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Let's see how many people out there believe that some things in this world just can't be explained. And if you love real-life crime mysteries that will leave you questioning everything, then don't just watch. Be part of the story. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another case like this one. Because trust me, this one is going to haunt you. Stay with me until the end. Because what you're about to hear, it's only the beginning. To understand what happened that night, you first have to understand who it happened to. This wasn't a rookie out on his first voyage. This wasn't someone prone to panic or wild stories. The man at the center of this mystery had spent most of his life on the ocean. A seasoned sailor, a retired Navy officer, or a commercial fisherman who had seen everything the Atlantic had to offer, or so he thought. Out there, in the vast open sea, experience isn't just useful. It's survival. He knew how to read the wind, how to track the stars, how to sense an approaching storm before the clouds even formed. The ocean was his home, his battleground, and his sanctuary. But even for a man like him, nothing could have prepared him for what he saw that night. The Atlantic Ocean is as unforgiving as it is magnificent. It has swallowed entire ships, entire crews, entire histories. The Bermuda Triangle, the Mary Celeste, the USS Cyclops, all vanished, leaving nothing behind but unanswered questions. This isn't folklore. These are real mysteries that have baffled experts for decades. And now, another mystery was about to be added to its depths. That night, there was no storm, no distress call, no reason to be afraid, until the silence came, until the wind died, until the sea, for the first time in his life, felt wrong. He remembered the exact moment the feeling crept in. 1 minute, everything was normal. The steady hum of the boat's engine, the rhythmic crash of the waves, the distant calls of seagulls. Then, it all stopped. No wind, no waves, no sound, just the feeling that he wasn't alone. The air felt thicker, almost electric, as if something unseen was pressing against his skin. He tried to shake it off, focus on the controls, but the unease only grew stronger. Then, the radio flickered with static, just for a second. A whisper of sound, a brief distortion. He reached for the dial, adjusting it slightly. And then, the voice came through. A voice not his own. But when he responded, nothing. His instinct screamed at him. Something was coming. The vessel, a ship in perfect condition, until it wasn't. His boat wasn't old, wasn't faulty. A strong vessel, built to withstand storms, waves, and time itself. But that night, it failed him. Not mechanically, no. The engine worked. The navigation lights flickered but held steady. Everything should have been fine. And yet, when he turned to look at the water, when he finally saw what was floating in the distance, he knew. This was no ordinary night. What was out there, waiting for him? Who, or what, had spoken through the radio? And why did everything change in that one eerie moment? Stay with me, because what happens next will send chills down your spine. Before we move forward, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where everything just felt wrong? Drop a comment right now, tell me where you're watching from, and let's see who else believes that some things in this world can't be explained. And if you haven't yet, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story, it's far from over. It started with a flicker, a sudden, sharp jolt, the kind that makes a seasoned sailor's heart drop because he knows. Engines don't just stutter for no reason. For a split second, the boat went dead. The hum of the motor, gone. The soft glow of the navigation lights, snuffed out. The entire world around him felt like it had paused, as if something, or someone, had pressed the reset button on reality. And then, just as suddenly as it stopped, everything came back on. The engine sputtered back to life. The lights flickered, but something felt different. The ocean was still, too still. The kind of stillness that doesn't happen naturally. The air? Thicker, heavier, wrong. He shook his head, trying to clear the creeping sense of dread building in his chest. Equipment malfunctions happen. Electrical glitches happen. But what happened next? That shouldn't have. The radio crackled. At first, just static, garbled, broken sounds. Then, clear as day, a voice. Mayday! Mayday! A distress call. Faint, weak, like someone barely hanging on. But the way it came through, it was off. Something about it sent a chill straight through him. He grabbed the radio, pressing the button. This is the Odyssey. Do you copy? What's your location? Silence. He tried again. Repeat. This is the Odyssey. You are broadcasting on an open channel. What is your emergency? Nothing. No response. Just the dull hum of the open sea. A phantom distress call. His grip tightened around the radio. Someone, somewhere, had called for help. And now, they were gone. His first instinct was logic. Maybe it was interference. Maybe another vessel nearby was out of range. Maybe the signal was weak. But his gut was screaming leave. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was debris. A dark shape, floating just ahead, bobbing gently with the movement of the water. He squinted. No, not debris. It was too deliberate in its movements. Too still. He steered the Odyssey closer, his hands tightening on the wheel. And as the boat approached, his breath caught in his throat. Because now, in the dim glow of his spotlight, he could see exactly what it was. A figure. A person. Floating face down. Motionless. Drifting. His chest tightened. He'd seen bodies before. This wouldn't be the first time the sea had claimed someone. But this wasn't right. Something was off about the way the body floated. Not the usual lifeless sway of someone lost to the waves. This was different. Like it was waiting. His fingers hovered over the throttle, his instincts pulling him in two different directions. Get out of here, or find out what happened. He hesitated. His gut was screaming. Turn back. Leave it alone. This isn't for you. But then he noticed something that sent his pulse hammering in his ears. The clothes. Military-grade boots. A uniform. A government insignia, partially torn, barely visible. This wasn't just someone. This was someone important. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here. And suddenly, everything, the dead air, the radio silence, the flickering power, made sense. He wasn't supposed to be here either. He took a deep breath. His hands felt clammy against the wheel. He wasn't alone out here. Something was watching. Something had been waiting for him to notice. And the real question wasn't just what was floating in the water. It was what was lurking beneath it. What happens next? That's where things get terrifying. If you've ever heard of mysterious disappearances at sea, or if you think this sailor was being watched, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't yet, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, this story, it's about to take a turn you won't believe. The waves lapped softly against the hull of the Odyssey, their rhythm steady, almost unnatural. The body in the water, it wasn't moving. Not the way a lifeless body should. Most bodies drift with the current, tossed and turned by the ocean's pull. But this one, it was perfectly still. Too still. The sailor reached for his flashlight, his fingers trembling against the cold metal. He aimed the beam toward the water, and as the light hit the surface, his breath caught in his throat. A hand, pale, motionless, floating just below the water's surface. For a split second, his mind raced with possibilities. A lost diver? A shipwreck victim? Someone who had fallen overboard? But then, he saw the fingers. They were too stiff, the joints unnaturally locked in place. The skin looked too smooth, too untouched by the ocean. This wasn't fresh, but it wasn't decayed either. It was as if the body had been preserved. A chill ran down his spine. Something was very, very wrong. He should leave. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to turn back, to pretend he never saw this. But something held him there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was duty. If there was a chance someone was still alive, he couldn't just sail away. Or maybe it was something else. Something keeping him right where it wanted him. He grabbed the boat hook, reaching toward the floating body. The second the metal touched the fabric, the hand twitched. Not from the waves. Not from the current. It moved. A sharp breath left his lungs. He jerked back, nearly dropping the hook. He shined his flashlight lower, trying to get a better look at the face. But there was no face. Or at least, not one he could see. The body was turned just enough to hide its features beneath the water's surface, as if it was deliberately avoiding his gaze. And then, the radio crackled. Not just static. A voice. A whisper. Low, breathless. "Help me." His heart pounded against his ribs. He grabbed the radio. "Who is this? Are you in distress?" Silence. The only sound was the waves, and his own ragged breathing. He turned back to the water. The body was gone. The water where it had been was empty. No ripples. No signs of movement. Just emptiness. Like it had never been there at all. He scanned the dark horizon, sweat trickling down his back despite the chill in the air. Something was out here. Something was watching him. And then, a thud against the side of the boat. Loud. Sudden. Like something large had just hit the hull. His grip tightened around the railing. Slowly, cautiously, he leaned over the side, shining his flashlight toward the water. And that's when he saw it. A shape, just beneath the surface. Long human-like. But not quite. It was staring up at him. He couldn't see the eyes, but he could feel them. Someone, was down there. Watching. Waiting. And before he could react, the engine cut out. Nowhere to run. Darkness swallowed him. No lights. No power. No sound but the heavy beating of his own heart. He tried the ignition. Nothing. He reached for his emergency flashlight. Dead. Panic clawed at his throat. He turned, scanning the black waters. But the shape beneath the surface, it was gone. The air was thick, pressing against his skin like something unseen was standing right behind him. He wasn't alone. He could feel it. And then, just as suddenly, the radio crackled again. A single, chilling whisper. His hands were shaking now. He needed to get out of here. He tried the ignition again. This time, the boat roared to life. The lights flickered back on, the hum of the engine filling the suffocating silence. But just as he turned the wheel to leave, something broke the surface. Something rose from the water, just far enough away that he couldn't see it clearly, but close enough that he felt its presence. And whatever it was watching him leave. Like it had let him go. Like it was telling him, this isn't over. What did this sailor witness in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? Was it something human? Or something else entirely? Before we continue, I need to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Have you ever heard of strange disappearances at sea? And if you haven't yet, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, what happens next? You won't believe it. The human mind is wired to recognize patterns, to seek out logic, to make sense of things, even when the truth is staring right at us, screaming that something is very, very wrong. At that moment, standing on the deck of the Odyssey, the sailor knew what he was looking at should not be here. The waves rolled gently beneath him, the dim glow of his flashlight bouncing off the water's surface. And there, floating just feet away, was the proof that whatever had happened out here was not an accident, a dead man in the water, or something else. The body was face down, arms slack, legs unmoving. But it wasn't bloated like a body lost at sea for days. It was intact, too intact. Then, his light caught something, a detail that sent ice straight through his veins. The boots, military grade, worn, but still in solid condition. His stomach twisted. This wasn't some unlucky fisherman. This was someone trained. Someone who belonged to an operation far bigger than a single drifting boat in the Atlantic. And suddenly, it hit him. This person wasn't lost. They were left. An even darker revelation. His eyes darted to the rest of the uniform, scanning for insignias, patches, anything that could tell him where this man came from. That's when he saw it. Half torn, barely visible, but there. A government agency's mark. Maybe military, maybe naval intelligence, maybe something worse. He swallowed hard. This was not a random drowning. This was something classified, something buried. And now, he was in the middle of it. A call for help or a death sentence. His hands felt numb as he reached for the radio. His voice was steady, too steady, like his brain was forcing his body to act normal when everything inside him screamed run. This is the Odyssey. I have a possible deceased individual floating at coordinates. Static. The radio cut out. His pulse spiked. He tried again. This is the Odyssey. I have a possible. Static. Then silence. No response. No acknowledgement. Just a wall of nothing. The kind of silence that means one of two things. Either no one can hear you, or someone doesn't want you to be heard. And that's when the unease he'd been pushing down turned into full-blown terror. Because out of the corner of his eye, something shifted. A silent threat on the horizon. At first, it was nothing. Just a shadow in the distance. But then he realized it wasn't moving with the waves. It was steady, controlled. A vessel, but it had no lights. No navigation beacons. No signs of identification. Just a dark, silent shape lurking in the open water. Watching. His fingers curled into fists. Every sailor knows, no ship runs dark in open water. Not unless they're hiding something. His instinct screamed at him. This isn't normal. This isn't right. And then, the body was gone. Something is watching. His flashlight darted back to the water. Nothing. Just empty waves. No ripples, no movement. Like the body had never been there at all. His breathing turned shallow. He looked back toward the unlit vessel. It was closer now. Still no lights. No sound. But it was moving. Toward him. His mind raced. Was this their doing? Had they been waiting for him to find the body? Were they here to clean up their mess? He reached for the throttle, his only thought now getting out of here. And that's when the first signal came through. A single, sharp burst over the radio. Not words. Not a message. Just a tone. 3 beeps. Then silence. Then, again. 3 beeps. Rhythmic. Deliberate. A signal. A warning. And the meaning was crystal clear. Turn back. Forget what you saw. Leave. The decision. Fight or flee. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to listen. To go. To never speak of this again. But then he saw something. One last, chilling detail that made his blood run cold. Through his binoculars, just for a second, he saw movement on the deck of the dark vessel. A figure. Standing at the edge. Watching him. Not panicked. Not rushing. Just standing there. Like they were waiting for him to make a decision. Like they already knew what he was going to do. He had seconds to act. Stay, and risk finding out exactly who was on that boat. Or leave, and spend the rest of his life wondering what he had just uncovered. He gritted his teeth, his hands shaking as he reached for the throttle. But just as he did, the unlit vessel cut its engine. Silence. Stillness. The kind of stillness that means one thing. They were waiting. Waiting to see if he was stupid enough to stay. What did this sailor uncover? Who was on that unlit vessel? And why did it feel like he was being warned? Before it was too late? Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Have you ever heard of a disappearance at sea that was never explained? And if you haven't yet, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, the real terror? It's only just beginning. The air was thick, not just from the ocean mist, but from something unseen, something heavier. The dark vessel sat motionless in the water, no lights, no signals, just a presence, watching, waiting. The body had vanished, gone as if it was never there. But now, something else had appeared, a sealed, waterproof bag, bobbing just a few feet away from the Odyssey. It was deliberate, placed there, or left behind. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he knew whatever was inside would change everything. His fingers felt stiff as he hooked the bag and pulled it aboard. It was heavy, waterlogged, but still intact. It was meant to survive. With a deep breath, he unzipped it. The second he saw what was inside, his stomach twisted. Not supplies, not survival gear. Documents. Stacks of government-marked folders, soaked but still legible. And then, as he pulled them apart, he noticed something even more chilling. Some of the pages had been burned. Someone had tried to destroy them before they ever hit the water. But why? His pulse pounded as he flipped through the half-ruined pages. The ink was blurred, but the words that remained, they sent a chill straight through his bones. Evidence of something sinister. Coordinates. Dates. A list of names. Some crossed out, some underlined, some with no explanation at all. Then, a familiar insignia on one of the pages. The same one that had been on the body's uniform. This wasn't just some accident. This was an operation. Something off the books. Something that was never meant to be discovered. He wasn't just looking at wreckage. He had just stumbled into something dangerous. And then, the air changed. That feeling, like he was being watched, turned into certainty. The dark vessel, the one that had been sitting, waiting, it was moving. Slow, steady, straight toward him. No lights, no warning. Just the silent confirmation that they had been waiting for this exact moment. His fingers clenched around the bag. His mind screamed at him. They're coming for it. For the documents. For him. His breath came fast. His pulse hammered in his ears. He had seconds to make a choice. Does he run? Or does he find out the truth? What was inside those burned documents? Who was watching from that unlit vessel? And more importantly, what happens when they finally reach him? Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Have you ever heard of a disappearance at sea that was never explained? And if you haven't yet, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, this story, it's far from over. There comes a moment when curiosity turns into survival, when the thrill of discovery fades, replaced by a cold, creeping realization. You were never meant to be here. And right now, standing on the deck of the Odyssey, clutching a bag filled with half-burned government documents, the sailor knew he had to leave. Now, not in a few minutes, not after figuring out more. Right now, because the unlit vessel, the one that had been watching him, waiting for him, was no longer waiting. It was coming. The engine won't start, and that's no accident. His hands fumbled with the ignition, twisting the key with desperate urgency. The engine coughed, sputtered, but wouldn't turn over. No, 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 no. Not now. He tried again. Nothing. His gut twisted. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was deliberate. Something was interfering with his systems. He flicked the radio, still dead. The navigation lights? Flickering, barely hanging on. His entire boat was shutting down around him. And that's when he heard it. The voices in the dark. A radio transmission. Not his. Theirs. The low hum of men speaking in hushed tones, their voices distorted through static. They were coordinating something. Moving in sync. Hunting. For him. He could feel it. The weight of eyes on him. The undeniable sense that whoever was on that ship knew exactly who he was. Exactly what he had. And they weren't leaving without it. The searchlight cuts through the darkness. Then, a blinding white beam sliced through the night. A searchlight. It cut across the waves in slow, deliberate movements. They weren't scanning randomly. They were looking. For something. For someone. His chest tightened. He wasn't just being watched. He was being hunted. And if he didn't move right now, he wasn't getting out of here alive. A desperate gamble. His heart pounded as he dropped to his knees, fumbling with the emergency backup system. He yanked the manual starter, praying, begging. The engine roared to life. No hesitation, no second thoughts. He slammed the throttle forward. The Odyssey lurched ahead, cutting through the waves like a wounded animal trying to escape a predator. The searchlight whipped toward him. They had him now. And that's when the real chase began. The pursuit. The dark vessel accelerated. No longer lurking. No longer hiding. Now, it was coming straight for him. His boat was fast, but theirs was faster, bigger, more powerful. This wasn't a random ship. This was a vessel built for control, built for pursuit. And they weren't trying to scare him anymore. They were trying to catch him. One last shot at survival. He veered hard, waves crashing against the hull, spray blinding his vision. They were gaining. Seconds. He had seconds. His eyes darted to the GPS. A shipping lane was ahead. If he could reach it, he'd have witnesses. People. Protection. He pushed the throttle to its limit, the engine screaming in protest. The searchlight locked onto him. The voices over the radio growing louder, clearer. And then, the dark vessel stopped. No gradual slowing. No circling back. Just an abrupt halt. As if they had made a decision. As if they had just let him go. Or worse, they knew something he didn't. For a long, terrifying moment, the Odyssey was the only thing moving across the Black Sea. And then, the radio crackled to life. One voice. Calm. Unshaken. Turn back. No anger. No urgency. Just a simple, cold command. Then, silence. The dark vessel slowly drifted back into the shadows. Gone. Like it had never been there at all. Did he escape? Or did they let him? The sailor didn't stop until he hit the shipping lane. Surrounded by cargo ships, distant city lights barely visible on the horizon. He was safe. Or at least, that's what he told himself. But that voice on the radio? That wasn't a warning. That was a reminder. They could have taken him, could have stopped him, but instead, they let him go. Because now, they knew exactly who he was, exactly what he had seen. And they knew, one day, he'd come looking for answers. And when he did, they'd be waiting. What was in those documents? Who was on that unlit vessel? And most importantly, why did they let him leave? Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Have you ever heard of a sea mystery that was never explained? And if you haven't yet, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, this isn't the end of the story. He zigzagged through the dark, pushing his boat past its limits. Every wave felt like a wall. Every shift of the current felt like a hand trying to pull him under. His muscles ached. His fingers burned from gripping the wheel. But he couldn't stop. Not until he lost them. Minutes felt like hours. His breath was ragged. His eyes stung from the salt and the wind. And then, suddenly, silence. The hum of the pursuing engine? Gone. He risked a glance over his shoulder. Nothing. The unlit vessel. It was just gone. No movement. No shadow in the distance. Just empty, endless water. Like they had never been there at all. The safe zone. Or so he thought. His heart still pounding, he pushed forward. His last hope, the shipping lane. If he could reach it, he'd be safe. There'd be witnesses. Cargo ships. Protection. After what felt like an eternity, lights appeared on the horizon. Massive tankers, passing in the distance. Civilization. He gunned the engine one last time, cutting across the waves, finally reaching the lane. And for the first time that night, he let himself believe it was over. The call for help. With shaking hands, he grabbed the radio. This time, it worked. Mayday, Mayday, this is the Odyssey. I have been pursued by an unmarked vessel in open waters, requesting immediate assistance. Seconds passed. Then, a response. This is the United States Coast Guard. Repeat your last transmission? Relief crashed over him. He wasn't alone anymore. But then, something strange happened. No trace. No evidence. No proof. When the Coast Guard finally arrived, they scanned the waters. Nothing. No sign of another boat. No readings on the radar. No wreckage. No proof that anyone had ever been there at all. And when he told them what had happened, when he described the chase, the voices, the searchlight, the missing body, the Coast Guard looked at him like he was crazy. Like they had heard this before. like they already knew, but would never say. And that's when he realized, whatever had happened out there, it was bigger than him, bigger than one sailor, bigger than anything the world would ever be allowed to know. The last ominous warning. Before they left, one officer pulled him aside. A low voice, a firm grip on his shoulder. You didn't see anything? Forget this ever happened. And that was it. The final, chilling warning. He had escaped. But deep down, he knew. He was still being watched. What was in those documents? Who was on that unlit vessel? And why, after everything, did they let him live? Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Have you ever heard of a disappearance at sea that was never explained? And if you haven't yet, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, this story, it isn't over. Some mysteries stay with you. They follow you like a shadow, never leaving, never giving answers, just questions. For the sailor, this wasn't over. Not even close. Because when he finally reached land, when he thought the nightmare had ended, he realized something far more terrifying. The real danger wasn't out at sea. It was waiting for him on shore. No evidence. No proof. No trace. The Coast Guard was thorough. They combed the area where he had been chased, ran scans, checked radar logs. They found nothing. No vessel. No wreckage. Not even a single, floating piece of evidence that anyone had been out there with him. It was like it had never happened at all. But the way they looked at him, they weren't surprised. And that was the first sign that something wasn't right. The debriefing started off standard. What did you see? When did you see it? How long did they chase you? But then, the questions changed. They weren't just asking about the ship. They were digging. Did you recover anything from the water? His heart pounded. He hesitated. Did they already know? He lied. No, just the body. And then it disappeared. The officer nodded. Didn't press him further. Like he had expected that answer. Then, a warning. A quiet, subtle statement that felt more like a threat. These waters are unpredictable. You'd be smart to put this behind you. And that was it. The interview was over. But the message? Crystal clear. Stop asking questions. Or next time, you won't get away. For a moment, he believed them. Tried to convince himself he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Tried to forget. But then, they came to find him. The knock on his door came less than 24 hours later. Not the Coast Guard. Not local police. Federal agents. No badges. No names. Just dark suits, cold stares, and a simple demand. We need you to come with us. They took him to a plane room. No windows. No recordings. No paperwork. One agent sat across from him, eyes sharp, calculating. And then he said it. You saw something you weren't supposed to see. No pretending. No excuses. They knew. The vanishing documents. They weren't interested in the chase. They weren't asking about the ship. They were only asking about one thing. The documents. Where were they? Who did he tell? Did he still have them? He shook his head. Lied again. I lost them. The agent didn't react. Just nodded. Like he already knew. And then, just as quickly as they came, they let him go. No paperwork. No charges. No reason for the interrogation. And when he got home, the bag, the waterproof bag he had hidden, gone. Nothing disturbed. No forced entry. But the documents? They had been erased. Like they had never been there in the first place. The lingering questions that will never be answered. Who was the man in the water? What was in those documents? And why, out of all the places in the ocean, was he the one who found them? Was it random? Or had he been led there? Had they been waiting for him? And the bigger question, what happens to the people who find out too much? Because whatever was in those files, it was dangerous. Dangerous enough to be erased. Dangerous enough to be hunted for. Dangerous enough to be worth killing over. Days passed. He stayed quiet. Told no one. And then, the final message came. A single envelope. No return address. Slipped under his door in the dead of night. Inside was a single slip of paper. No threats. No explanations. Just 6 words, typed neatly in the center. You were never there. And that's when he understood. This wasn't over. It would never be over. Because the people behind this? They don't just make things disappear. They make people disappear. Who is controlling the truth? Who were the men on that ship? What were they covering up? And more importantly, how many stories like this have been buried, erased, hidden from the world? This sailor survived. But how many others never made it back? Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Do you believe this was a cover-up? And if you haven't yet, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, this isn't the only story they don't want you to hear. Some stories fade with time. The details blur, the fear dulls, and eventually, the memories settle into the past. Just another strange tale buried beneath the weight of everyday life. But not this one. Because for the sailor, that night never truly ended. To this day, he refuses to talk about it. Not with friends. Not with family. Not even when he's had too much to drink and old stories start slipping out. Because this isn't just a story. It's a warning. And whatever he saw that night, whatever he uncovered, it wasn't meant for him. It wasn't meant for anyone. The man who left the sea. After that night, he changed. He never sailed alone again. A man who had spent his entire life navigating open waters. A man who once called the sea his home, walked away from it. He sold the Odyssey. Refused to step foot on a boat unless he had people with him. He stayed away from deep waters, away from places where no one could hear you scream. And when someone asked why, he would only say 4 words. You wouldn't believe me. And maybe he's right. Maybe this was just a case of a sailor in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe he was caught in the middle of something much bigger. Something that stretches beyond one man, one boat, one night. A secret that was never supposed to float to the surface. And now, he's left with one terrible, suffocating thought. If they let him live, it's only because they knew he'd stay quiet. But now, I ask you, what do you think happened out there? Was this just a case of bad luck? Or did he uncover something he was never meant to see? And more importantly, if it happened once, how many times has it happened before? How many have found the truth and didn't live to tell the story? If you thought this case was chilling, then wait until you hear what's coming next. A cargo ship that vanished without a trace, only to reappear days later, with no crew on board. A rescue mission that found something no one can explain. And a final message from a missing sailor that still haunts investigators to this day. Was it an accident or something else? Stay tuned. Because you won't believe what's next. If you love real-life crime mysteries that challenge everything you think you know, don't just watch. Be part of the story. Hit that like button to let us know you want more of these deep dive investigations. Subscribe so you don't miss the next mind-blowing case. Turn on notifications, because trust me, when the next mystery drops, you're going to want to be the first to hear it. And remember, some stories aren't just stories. Some truths are meant to stay buried. But every once in a while, they float to the surface. And when they do, you'll hear about it here. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the ocean never forgets.